Ruud, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be here.
You've done some incredible things in your life, but it all kind of has to start somewhere. So maybe to kick things off, tell us a bit about your background and where you grew up. I mean, you mentioned before the podcast that you grew up in a pretty poor family, so maybe that's a good starting point.
Yes, I come from a relatively poor family background. Not that anybody was hungry, but the first time I traveled outside the Netherlands, I was 17 years of age. This was also the first time I ever walked into a plane, and a number of years ago, I was KLM's most frequent flyer. So, I mean, quite a lot happened there.
Change.
I started my first company at the age of 16, I think. It was a land-based commercial pirate radio station because commercial radio was prohibited in those days. And it was very interesting because we were broadcasting, and obviously at a certain moment the authorities didn't appreciate that, and they came and they basically took us off the air. And then we decided to put the transmitter on one side of town and have another small transmitter broadcasting on a very irregular frequency. So we had a studio on one side of town and the big transmitter on the other side of town. So when the authorities would seize the main transmitter, we could still keep our studio equipment. At a certain moment, the station became extremely popular, and at a certain moment, the raids that the police and the authorities did became extremely frequent every few days. And then there was an unused big old coal exhaust pipe over 100 meters large in town. And what we did during the night is we asked some alpinists to climb into that tower, put big transmitters on the tower. We then put a big antennas on the tower, put a big transmitter downstairs, and we closed the tower with concrete, so it was all plastered. So when the authorities did, and then we started broadcasting, and you could hear the station basically in 40% of the country. And then the authorities came and they looked at that tower and they couldn't find any way to enter the tower. The big antennas were on top of the tower, and it took them 6 weeks to get us off the air. And when they finally were able to climb to those antennas, we had put a bucket up there with 2 glasses, a bottle of champagne in there, and said, "Congratulations, you finally got us." And the moment they took us off the air, we switched on another transmitter on the other side of town. So that's how I started my career. But at a certain moment, I mean, the raids just became too frequent, and I became a radio DJ on board a pirate radio ship, moored in the Thames estuary, about 16 miles outside territorial waters in the UK.
Like real pirate ship.
A real pirate ship.
Wow.
With a big tower on it, and the station was called Radio Caroline, a legendary pirate radio station, which, by the way, is still on air nowadays as an online station. And I spent about 2 years on the high seas, broadcasting 3 months off the ship, and then being back on land, smuggled into the country on fishing boats, and even on the Rainbow Warrior, the former Greenpeace ship. Back on land for a few weeks, and then back to the radio ship again. So that's how I started my career. And then around the age of 20, I landed my first legal job in broadcasting, and I became a radio reporter, a TV reporter, a news anchor, and that's how things came about. And then I'm 60 years of age now. 10 years ago, I really decided that I had enough of media and broadcasting. You saw Netflix, Spotify disrupting the industry. And together with my good friend and partner, Patrick de Zeeuw, we launched Startupbootcamp, which was great.
Have you ever thought about creating a movie about your life? It sounds like a perfect kind
of... No. It's not... No. I mean, there was a great movie about those pirate days made, which was called The Boat That Rocked. Can everybody advise to... It's slightly romanticized, but it gives a nice picture about the situation we had on board.
Accurate depiction of
life
absolutely.
Absolutely. Just look it up.
Where did the rebellious streak come from? Because, it sounds like you, at a very early age, decided that you wanted to create this company to sort of... I don't know, like challenge authority or something like that.
Yeah.
Where did it come from at such a young age?
Well, because I come from a relatively poor family background, I decided to find my way out of, let's say, my social environment. I'm not looking down at my parents. I really admire them. But I decided that I wanted to move ahead, and I've always been slightly different. So later during my life, I became a supervisory board member of a bank, for instance. And I had many supervisory board positions, but I was always asked to be a member of those boards because I was different. So I've always been slightly rebellious, and it's just in my veins. It's always great to challenge things, and it has made me very successful. But I've also had big failures in my life as well. I once launched a low-pay TV sports TV channel, which became the biggest failure in my career. And the shareholders altogether lost about, let me try and do this in Australian dollars, about something like 65, 70 million Australian dollars. Do I do this right? No, sorry, even more, 130 million Australian dollars. So that was a big loss. And I had to pay quite a bit of that myself. So it's not just been a success story.
Yeah, it's ups and downs.
Absolutely. It's being an entrepreneur means going from deep despair to huge euphoria, and you really live through all the emotions in between. That's part of life.
How do you deal with that?
Well, you just have to accept that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to take a certain risk. And I took major risk, and I had major failures, and fortunately I was able to earn a lot of money back. And you get older and a little wiser over the years. And I prefer to talk about my failures because people can learn way more from my failures than from my successes. And one of the great things about being 60 years of age is that nowadays I can literally tell about my experiences in podcasts like these, etc. And that's a great thrill.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll jump back into that later on. But you've had a lot of roles in media in your early days.
Yeah.
You've even become in the past managing director of NBC Europe, program director at RTL Netherlands. Before that, could you summarize your experience in the media industry?
Well, I've launched the first 2 commercial radio stations in the Netherlands,
Yep.
the first 2 legal radio stations, and because broadcasting commercial radio in the Netherlands was illegal, I found a loophole in the law. So there's European legislation which basically says that if something is legal as a product in one country, that you have to be able to sell it in another country as well. So commercial radio was legal in the UK, it was legal in Luxembourg. So we started up radio stations in those countries, beaming into the Netherlands, and those stations were distributed via cable, and as a result we were able to reach initially about 40% of the population. And after broadcasting for 2 years and noticing that those stations couldn't be closed down by the authorities, I thought, well, if this works for radio, then it should work for TV as well. So I was happy with 3 other people to launch the first 2 commercial TV stations in the Netherlands. And it's great if you're the first. I mean, you are a monopolist, we really conquered the market extremely fast. I mean, within half a year we had over 1/3 of all viewing time in the country. And after doing that for a few years, I suggested to my shareholders to launch a 3rd station, and they said, no, the market isn't ready yet. And then I just got an offer I couldn't refuse from NBC to manage NBC Europe, which later I turned into CNBC. So
was it a very different experience for you, being the founder of all these radio stations and being a bit of a rogue in the industry, and then suddenly going to manage what is a very what's legal and big and established radio company? Was it a big change for you?
Not really. Mind you, it's not. I didn't try to. I wasn't a pirate because I liked it. There is, of course, there's the thrill of doing something which is just slightly outside the law. But the only reason I was a pirate broadcaster was because there were no legal means to do commercial radio in my home country. But once those stations were legalized, I was happy that I could just walk the streets and be very open about it.
Yeah.
So it's a long time ago now, and so it was great to be part of to launch CNBC Europe and to be part of NBC, which in those days was part of and owned by General Electric. So it gave me the opportunity to be pretty close to Jack Welch, who was then the famous CEO of General Electric, which in those those days was the largest company in the world and the most valuable company in the world. And I learned a lot from him. And my family wasn't really happy living in London, so I moved back to the Netherlands. And then I was asked by John de Mol and Joop van den Ende, two great entrepreneurs, to join the board of Endemol. And there may be a few Australian listeners who have heard of that company, but if I mention Big Brother, the TV program, which has become
part of your career.
A huge hit, and and Endemol became the largest independent TV producer in the world because mainly of that program, which was created by John de Mol, one of the founders of the company. And we then took Endemol public, and it was sold about 5-6 years later to Telefonica from Spain for 5.7 billion in 2002, 158 times earnings, which was great because it made me really financially independent. Independent. And so that was a thrill.
Yeah. So what was your personal involvement in the whole Big Brother thing? Were you involved with a team that?
Well, the original idea was created by John de Mol and Paul Reumer, another guy, but there was no online business model there. And together with one of my other colleagues, a guy named John van der Putten, who deserves all the credits for that, we developed a business model for the online part. So in those days, you had internet providers, and there was one internet provider which was really a challenger in Europe called World Online, and they were willing to pay us a few bucks per subscriber that was eager to see, let's say, what was happening inside the Big Brother house outside the regular broadcasting hours. So you would see, let's say, the compilation of whatever happened in the last 24 hours on regular TV, but the other 23 hours you could watch live online if you became a subscriber, and we made a lot of money out of that. I mean, we were by far the most profitable internet company in Europe during 1999 because of that program, which is interesting because actually Endemol in those days was a really conservative old-fashioned TV producer, and then moving into the online world was such a thrill. And you know, I've always been a very early adapter. I had been a subscriber to CompuServe, which was kind of a walled garden version of the internet I think in 1985 already. Wow. So this was really the early days of the internet, and then the internet opened up, and I always saw the potential. I always urged my fellow board members in the companies where I worked to really push for the internet, but it was hard in the traditional TV industry. So after leaving the media industry, it was great to start Startupbootcamp and to really accelerate internet companies. And we've done over 900 companies thus far around the globe, which was great. Yeah.
So where did the inspiration for Startupbootcamp come from? You mentioned that, was it a shift in internet or was it something else? Or?
No, I had been very fortunate that Patrick de Zeeuw, my co-founder in Startupbootcamp, reported to me at Endemol for about 8 years.
Got it.
And when I celebrated my 50th birthday, my wife said to me, listen, it's time to do something else. If you ever want to do something else in your life, this is the moment, because you're 50, you have the network, you got the money, you got the energy. So if you want to do something else, this is it. And Patrick heard us saying that, and he said, listen, why don't we start a new company together? I said, well, what are we going to do? He said, well, what's the most fun you've ever had in your career? I said, well, the most fun I've ever had is launching new companies. He said, well, why don't we start a company to help other companies launch? And I said, that's a great idea. And then I didn't hear anything from him for 3 weeks. And then he gave me a call. He said, listen, we're about to go to New York together. I said, why? He said, well, there's a company there called Techstars, and these guys are doing precisely what you want to do. They're launching new companies all the time. They are an accelerator. So we went over to New York and we spent a week at Techstars. And at the end of the week, we said, listen, guys, we would like to license your format for Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And they said, well, that's impossible because we already licensed the format to start a bootcamp in Copenhagen. I said, but Amsterdam is the Netherlands and Copenhagen is Denmark. And they said, well, that may be the case, but nevertheless, we licensed it already. But these Danish guys are really great people. Why don't you give them a call and see if you can cooperate? So we flew from New York to Denmark, to Copenhagen. We spent a week with the Danish guys, and they said, listen, we haven't started yet. Why don't you start Startupbootcamp Amsterdam, and we'll start Startupbootcamp Copenhagen. We create a holding company in London, Startupbootcamp Global Ltd, and we'll just do this together, because Patrick and me had the experience of scaling from a few countries to over 20 countries with the TV production company, with Endemol. And there was only one condition. They said the name has already been set. It's Startupbootcamp, which is a strange name because it's misspelled all the time by non-native English speakers, etc. But that was a fact of life. So that's how we launched. And after launching, my co-founder Patrick really improved the Techstars format in a tremendous way. For instance, we added pre-mediation. A major reason why startups fail is internal team quarrels. So we ask our team members to sit down at least once a month to talk to a pre-mediator, not to solve issues, but to make certain they do not arise. It's just an example. And Techstars were so impressed with the improvements that we made that they said, listen, can we license your improvements?
Wow.
And we said, well, why don't you use our improvements and we use your original format, and we just do this without any money going up and down anymore. And they agreed to that, which was great. So we were one of the, I would say, first 4 or 5 accelerators in the world using this format, which is since then being copied by thousands and thousands of other accelerators.
And for the listeners who aren't familiar with the format that you're describing, could you just quickly package it up?
Yeah, basically we give startup founders 1.5 years of their life back, because we let them do in 3 months what would otherwise take them 1.5 to 2 years. So we have a program where people can apply for. We only have 10 startups per program batch, but usually we get 700 to 1,000 applications. And once those 10 startups are in, we connect them to our large mentor network. We got thousands of mentors around the globe, and they pick 5 lead mentors who help them to grow in a tremendous way. And we have a network of about 200 corporate enterprises that we can immediately connect them with. So if one of our startups says, hey, I want to be in touch with a person at Energy Australia, we say, okay, you speak to Anthony Wiseman at Energy Australia, and he can immediately direct you to the right person at Energy Australia. So where usually it would take them months to find the right person in a corporate partner, we can do this within 24 hours. And so when they are in our accelerator program, they spend about 20 to 25% of their time going through a curriculum where we teach them how to pitch to investors, where we teach them the lean startup methodology, things like that. And they work on their company for about 75% of their time. Then after 3 months, we have a demo day, and they pitch to a room filled with hundreds of investors. And that's where they usually pick up substantial amount of money, from $500,000 to $1 million Australian dollars on average. And we take it from there. And our business model is that we ask for 8% of their shares, of their equity. And we have income from our corporate partners. So that's our business model.
Okay. Any companies you're particularly proud of?
Well, many companies. One that I would really like to mention is a company named MPost. This is a company from our AfriTech program. They were accelerated by us in Cape Town. And, in Africa, many people don't have a regular postal address. And if you want to have access to, let's say, Social Security or things like that, you need an address. So in Kenya, MPost created a situation where if you have a mobile phone number, that mobile phone number serves as your address, your postal address. So 32 million people now subscribe to MPost in Kenya, and as a result they have access to banking facilities, to Social Security, things like that. You may have heard of a company named M-Pesa, which is let's say a micro loan and payment provider in Kenya. And nowadays you can only become an M-Pesa member if you have an MPost address. So these guys have built a very valuable company, but in the meantime they've really solved a key social issue as well. So they've improved the world. It's not something that you and I don't have to use it. You're fortunate enough to live in a great town like Melbourne, and I'm fortunate enough to spend most of my life in Amsterdam. But this is really a third world issue which has been solved by one of our companies, which is really fantastic.
Yeah,
So,
and you've got another company that just came through the fintech accelerator program here, doing microlending in Myanmar as well, Zigway.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's you're not just investing in things that are necessarily extremely profitable, but also things that have a social, and good cause.
Absolutely. And we're currently working on a global SDG accelerator, the Social Development Goals of United Nations. So it's not just about the money.
Yeah.
Although I should emphasize we are a commercial company. And everybody knows us from Startup Bootcamp, but we have a second brand as well, all part of the same group, called InnoLeaps. And in InnoLeaps, we do corporate acceleration. So like we do startups with Startup Bootcamp, we do corporate teams in InnoLeaps. And InnoLeaps actually is twice as large as Startup Bootcamp, but very few people realize.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How do you balance that social cause and profitability? Sometimes they're...
Well, they can go together very, very well. It's. I mean, it's not our main objective is to build a stable company. We have a huge social responsibility ourselves because we employ hundreds of people, and so that's important. But it's great if you can combine commercial activities with a social impact element as well. And mind you, not all of our companies have that social impact element. We did another company. This is interesting. Many people think that most of our startups are 18-year-old guys running around in T-shirts. First, I'd say that over 40% of our startups are female. Of our founders. But the average age of the startups going through our program is 36 years of age. And our most successful team ever was built by that company was built by 4 guys who walked in, each of them 52 years of age and older, 3 Germans, 1 American guy, and they started a company named Relayer. And this is an IoT company, so they create, let's say, sensors, which you can put, for instance, in an elevator, and they will automatically let you know when it's time to maintain and to do maintenance on the elevator. And these guys came to us and they said, we know how to build a product. We've been working together for many, many years in a corporate world, but we don't know how to create a company. So if you help us to create a company, we'll create a product and we'll be very successful. So that's what we did. And these guys sold the company a year ago after almost 5 years after the start, and they sold the company for $300 million.
Wow.
And we still owned about 1.4% in the company, so you can do the math.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so, and we invested 15,000 euros, and we made a lot of money out of that, which is great. It doesn't happen, I mean, that's not what always happens. I mean, obviously there are startups not making it either, and but approximately 75% of our companies becomes 4 years of age or older, so our survival rate is pretty high.
And that's a good segue to the next question. How do you pick the people that you bring into your accelerator? There's all this bias and misconception, and like you said, people think that startups are just 18-year-olds in T-shirts. How do you select people to go through?
Yeah, this is by far the most important thing we're doing, because many people think we are just looking at ideas and then we pick the most interesting one. But to be very honest, we see about 20,000 new ideas per year. And most of them we've already seen in one or another way. And to be very honest again, we don't care too much about the idea. We look at the team first and foremost, because a great team can create something nice out of a bad idea. But a bad team will destroy any superb idea. So we really look at the team. So we have very strict criteria. So we always want teams that consist of at least 3 people. We would like those 3 people to have complementary skills. We ask them to do a psychological test, and we can't say that if you have a certain psychological profile that your company will become a success, but we know for certain that if you miss certain elements in your profile, you will never be able to build a successful company. So the psychological test is a really important element, and finally we have this pre-mediation thing to make certain that there are no team quarrels, because 3 people start a company and say, oh, we're going to do this 24/7, we're really going to create a great company out of this. And then one of them says, well, unfortunately, my mother-in-law is ill, I have to take care of the kids today. And the next day, something else happens, and the other two are putting in all they got, and one person drops out, and then tensions start to arise, and then there's a team blow up at the end. So we do everything. Investing in startups is really, tricky. It's risky, but we do everything we can to avoid any risk as much as possible.
Right, and people think that investing is necessarily risky, but it sounds like you've developed a framework to de-risk that process.
Yes, but still, if we have a batch of 10 startups, 2 may be very, very good and have exceptional returns, and there are probably 4 or 5 who are doing okay, and some will go down. That's life.
How do you manage the cohort in that case when you see clear winners and companies that are clearly lagging behind? Do you invest more in the winners, or do you help those companies that are dragging behind? Or?
The winners usually don't need a lot of help. The company I just mentioned, Relayer, we helped them pretty intense during the first 3 to 6 months, and afterwards they went out on their own, and we heard very little from them other than the usual reporting that you would expect as a shareholder. But the companies that are lagging behind, those are the ones that require most of the energy, and basically they can ask for help 24/7, 365 days a year, under one condition, that they tell us how things are going. Because many startup founders are so busy trying to find investors and trying to find clients that they forget to report to their shareholders. Right. And even though we tell them during the program, you have to report, you have to communicate, and you have to be very transparent. So don't just tell us the good news, tell us the bad news as well. Then things come up, they're busy, and they think, I have now the choice between talking to a client or reporting to my shareholders, and they choose the client. And then at a certain moment, if we haven't heard from them for a while, and they ask us for help, we say, sorry, we are not going to help you because you haven't reported. So please tell us how you're doing, and afterwards we may be willing to help you. Yeah. But the good ones, are very transparent and tell us the good news and the bad news, and they can really call us 24/7, and we will help them.
Yeah, sure. Have you noticed traits in founders that are successful? Maybe you could highlight 3 or 4 traits that you see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in any successful team, you need driven people. You want people who are so passionate, they're willing to eat this table that we're sitting at in order to create the best company in the world. Without drive, without passion, it's impossible to create a great company. Secondly, it's nice if there's someone in there who's structured because of the reporting, because of the admin and everything that comes with it. Thirdly, it's nice if there's someone who can develop software. And who knows something about the industry. And it doesn't all have to be in one person, maybe in 3 persons or in a larger team, but those are the elements we're looking for. And then, of course, complementary skills, and it helps if you have a bit of experience. We don't care about religion, we don't care about nationality, we don't care about age, but those are the things we're looking for. And as long as you don't harm anybody else with your opinions or your beliefs, you're welcome.
And what about your hundreds of employees in SBC? Do they go through the same process that the founders go through?
Yes. All our employees have done the psychological test. We are growing pretty fast ourselves. We grow about 40% this year.
Wow.
So what I try to do is to talk to as many people in the company as I can. So we employ about 100 people in Amsterdam. I have spoken to at least 95 of them, and I try to keep up with that, but I'm now in Australia for 2 weeks, and then I'll take a short break. So in January I'll probably have to sit down for a full day and talk to those people. I try to say I'm now in Melbourne for 2 weeks. I try to talk to as many people as we have here, because maintaining the culture and facilitating our own managers, that's our key role. You start a company, and you in the beginning you manage the company, and you manage the people, and you control the people. But at a certain moment, you have to move from controlling people to trusting people to facilitating people, and that's where we currently are.
Yeah, I think it's a dream for a lot of companies to be able to build 100+ person organization, let alone a company that's in, I think, 17 cities across the globe.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of them: Cape Town, Amsterdam, Melbourne.
New York, Mexico, Milan. We love cities with an M. Milan, Melbourne, Mexico,
that's a good point,
Mumbai. That's just a coincidence. We're looking at Singapore now, Lausanne in Switzerland. Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you grow so quickly?
Well, we've done it before. The trick is to first create a stable HQ, a stable home office to operate from. So once you've literally found product market fit, so you really have a product that, and you're certain that there's a need for that product in the market, that's when you are able to scale. And what you do is you always start with finding the right people. Once again, this is a people's business. So before we moved into Melbourne, we made certain that we found Trevor Townsend and Richard Selm, two amazing guys who are running our operations here. And when we decided to move into Melbourne, we first sat down and said, listen, this is who we are. This is our culture. And so we don't talk about the business. We start talking about our culture, which is really, the company is built on trust. So we try to create a very safe environment where people can criticize each other, not to hurt each other, but to make each other better. So once you've established that situation, then you can say, okay, these are our products. Now let's try and sell them. And we were very fortunate that Energy Australia was our launching customer in Melbourne, and we've had a great relation with them ever since then. So on one hand, we follow our clients. So if they demand us, if we now got 3 clients that want us to start up in Singapore, so that's great. So we literally hit the ground running. But you also have to be very careful not to move into countries that may seem to be very attractive, but actually where the market is just too small. To give you an example, we could launch a company in Norway. And Norway has 2 million citizens. It requires as much energy to start up in Norway as it requires to start up in, let's say, Germany. So you'd rather use that energy to start up in Germany with 80 million citizens than to do it in Norway. There are certain countries where we don't want to be active. Saudi Arabia, a country which is discriminating half of its population. We just don't want to be there. We have our own values and we stick to them.
Yeah, amazing. And how do you ever tweak your program based on the different cultures that you see?
All the time.
Yeah.
Well, we have our main format, but obviously there are local situations that sometimes require you to be a little bit more flexible. But the great thing is we have a strict format and we try to stick to it. I mean, we come from the TV industry, so you just don't. I mean, if you look at The Voice here in Australia, I bet the chairs are red because they're red all around the globe.
Right.
And I bet that the Australian producer is not allowed to make them green because he just feels that green is a nicer color, or yellow here in Australia. So we try to be pretty strict there as well. But for instance, we have a great team over here, and they have now developed, for instance, an amazing tool to rate the startups as part of our final selection days. And they've invented it over here, and we're now rolling it out throughout all the other countries as well. So we give people enough freedom to be creative and to improve things, but we love them to communicate with us. So communication is key to scaling. It's very tempting to roll out throughout the world in a very fast way, but if people are not communicating anymore, things run out of hand.
What does good communication look like?
Good communication can only occur if you really trust each other. So you have to be certain that you can criticize each other because you want to improve the operation instead of criticizing someone because you want to hurt him or her. So building trust is key to everything we're doing. It's really hard to get into our company. Before we hire anybody, there are 4 talks with individual people. There's the psychological test we just mentioned. So we hire very, very slow and we fire very, very fast if someone doesn't fit in. We have very few rules in the company. The main rule is just act and behave in the best interest of the company. So we don't tell people if they should fly business class to Sydney from Melbourne or tourist class. We don't tell them to fly business class to Amsterdam from Melbourne or tourist class. That's up to them. We would just like them to act like they founded their company themselves. We don't check their expense accounts. So it's hard to get into our company, but once you're in, you fully trust it. But there is this, I would say social climate in the culture in the company where if you misbehave, certain people start to feel that, and almost automatically you'll be pushed out. But as I said, every 2 years you grow to a new level, And we're not hesitative to ask people to go if we feel they're not up to that next step. So you can make a very good career pretty fast in our company, but we're improving all the time. And if you don't fit in anymore, well, then it's time to go. And Patrick and me, we founded the company, and we have our own pre-mediation sessions as well.
Okay.
So twice a year, we look each other in the eye and we ask the people around us, hey, are we still the right people to lead this company? Because, it's one thing to manage 2 people. It's another thing to manage 10. It's more difficult to hire 50. And then if you're now moving up to the hundreds of people, I mean, it requires a different management style, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few people like Jeff Bezos who started on their own and who are now managing hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, this week, Larry Page and Sergey Brin,
Step down.
the co-founders of Google, stepped down.
Yeah.
And I don't want to compare myself and Patrick with those guys. I mean, they're in a different league. But it's important to ask that question. And it's also very important that you got people surrounding you who are able to say and who don't feel threatened if they say, who aren't feeling scared to tell you, hey, Ruud, you're 60 years of age. You don't belong here anymore. And I got gray hair. The average age of our people is way younger than I am. And I always say, then listen, I don't want to be the laughing stock of the company. Please tell me if I'm misusing and overusing my time.
Yeah. It must be hard for a founder to be able to take that feedback on board and potentially let go of control of a company. Have you had any startups in your companies that have had to bring in an external CEO or external management teams?
Let's say it's just part of the growing pains. And every now and then I had to tell a founder and say, hey, apparently you're a great founder, but not a great manager. Maybe it's time to hire someone else to manage the company. And I sincerely hope that people are not scared to tell me that my time is over. And if that's the moment, I'll just be a shareholder in the company, and I'll just start my next company, because there are still many ideas that I would like to build.
Yeah, awesome. Ruud, you're pretty famous in Australia for your annual state of technology talks, and I've been through a few of them myself as well. I know you're giving one tomorrow at Startup Grind Australia. Sorry, not tomorrow, on Monday. Yeah. But could you summarize for me your top 3 trends of what's happening in tech?
Some of the things we're seeing are pretty scary. First, we think that the internet will become more and more nationalized. I mean, we all know that in North Korea you can't access the internet, and we all know that in China you can't access Facebook and Twitter without using VPNs and things like that. But this is really becoming a trend. If there's any social unrest in a certain country, there's a tendency that more and more countries and governments the first thing they do is shut the internet down to make certain that groups can't communicate amongst each other anymore. You also see that when there's tension between countries, they try to attack each other's cyber facilities. So this is pretty scary. I mean, we are so used to the internet as a medium where you can communicate from one side of the globe to the other side of the globe and share things and be on social media. And for the foreseeable future, you from Melbourne, me from Amsterdam, will be able to communicate online as much as we want. But try being in China and try communicating with someone in Iran, for instance. That's pretty hard. And I think it's extremely scary and worrying that this is happening. So we see a trend that the internet will become nationalized. That's our first prediction for the next 18 months. Our second prediction is that the Terminators are coming. And what we mean is that the military use of algorithms, of automation, of robots is increasing all the time. I just mentioned cyber warfare, but you also see that robots and algorithms are becoming more and more important. We've seen drones flying over Afghanistan, being operated and piloted from the safe environment of an operator in Florida. But this is really extending not just to, let's say, drones, but also to the battlefield in itself, which has a good side because, I mean, you don't need soldiers on the battlefield anymore, but there are big risks there as well. And our third prediction is that hyper-reality is here to stay. We've all heard of fake news. You know that it's pretty easy to impersonate, to really take a real picture of Barack Obama, to take his real voice and to manipulate it in such a way that you can literally let him say anything you want, and it'll be very hard for someone else to realize that this is not the real Barack Obama, but someone misusing his voice and looks. This happens with text now as well. So there are algorithms that you can just give one sentence and the algorithm will create a full essay out of that and a pretty good one as well. And it happens with voice as well. So, I mean, there are situations where, for instance, in the UK a CEO received a call on his voicemail with one of his colleagues asking him to transfer 250,000 euros to an address in Hungary. And he knew this colleague very, very well, so he transferred the money. And 3 calls later, he found out that it wasn't his colleague who had called him, but someone misusing his colleague's voice. So the technical capabilities are there. At the same time, you see that augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality are probably slower than we originally expected, but are growing now. I think in 2022, Apple is announced will introduce augmented reality glasses. So the real world and the virtual world are becoming more and more intermingled and mixed. And we think that trend will not go away. So we have to be, as consumers, we have to be very careful that we have to verify who is the person speaking to you, even if you look at someone on TV, is this the real person or is it someone else impersonating him? But at the same time, especially a younger generation will become so used to using augmented reality and virtual reality that it'll be hard to see the difference between the real world and the hyper world. So we think hyper reality is here to stay.
Do you think this is a reflection of where technology is in its life cycle? Because at the early days, it's exuberance, opportunity, and now it sounds like people are starting to wake up and go, hey, fake news, or hey, cyber attacks and threats, and is this an inflection point for tech, or?
Well, I think there is a reflection point.
Right.
Not if you look at tech in general. My feeling is that the more enthusiastic, let's say, a certain group of people becomes about their smartphones and about everything going digital, etc., that there's a growing group as well that is saying, hey, let's wait and see. I mean, the sales of dumb phones instead of smartphones is growing tremendously. There's a group of DJs preferring analog records to digital music. There are people who prefer to read from paper instead of reading from e-readers. There is literally the slow tech movement is becoming more and more important. People who would like to listen to dialogues for 3 hours. I mean, the mere fact that we are now talking on a podcast is fantastic. I mean, there's probably a small group of people interested in what we're saying, but that group is probably listening pretty intensely. So there are always two sides to the equation, and I think this is indeed a very important reflection moment with the internet becoming nationalized, with tech being used in warfare, with so it's good. Take for instance China's social credit system. You get rewarded if you behave properly, and you get punished if you do misbehave, and your behavior is controlled all the time by cameras all around China. I think it's good that we wonder ourselves, hey, where are we heading with all this?
Yeah, and what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs in all of this, or how should entrepreneurs react?
Well, it has never been easier to start a company than today. You don't need huge marketing budgets anymore to promote your company. You just use social media. Everything has become way faster. So the opportunities are huge. But what I really like is that, especially amongst young people, starting entrepreneurs, there's a huge tendency to think about what the impact of their activities will be on the globe. Obviously, there are people with dollar signs in their eyes. But my feeling is that sustainability, for instance, becomes more and more important for young people. So they say, okay, we're going to build a new company. And obviously, it has to be sustainable from day one. Where in the past, sustainability was something special, something you could use to promote your company. Now it's the norm. So I'm really happy to see that happening. At the same time, we are operating in the tech industry. And we have to realize that the tech industry is using a lot of energy. To give you an example, the Bitcoin, is using as much energy as the whole country of Austria in a year's time.
Wow.
So the footprint is just huge, and the more Bitcoins are being mined, the more energy it requires. I mean, if you buy a pizza using a Bitcoin here in Melbourne, the amount of energy that is spent is comparable to what a US household is using in 20 days.
Wow.
And very few people realize that.
Yeah.
So that's something to bear in mind when you start your own company using the Bitcoin or blockchain technology. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what's Startupbootcamp's role in responding to this state of tech?
Well, I think we have to educate our people and to make people aware. Many people think that because we are shareholders in 900 online startups, that we only see the upside of the internet, but we are very well aware that we are disrupting certain industries, which means that people can become unemployed. And we try to respond to that we have a third leg to our organization called the Talent Institute, where we take unemployed students or university graduates, mainly people who have studied history or philosophy or psychology, and we reskill them and we create young digital innovators out of them, or growth hackers, professions that didn't exist, let's say, 6-7 years ago. So we try to operate as responsible as possible. And I'm not saying we're not making mistakes. You know, I'm here in Melbourne. I flew I traveled 27 hours to get here, and my carbon footprint getting here is probably pretty big, but we are well aware of it. I mean, certain things are unavoidable. I just have to be here. I mean, we're building a commercial company, but we're well aware of it, and we try to offset our carbon footprint ourselves. So like our demo days are carbon neutral all around the globe.
Yeah. And just quickly touching on the Talent Institute side of things, if there are people out there listening to this podcast who are interested in the Talent Institute, could you just summarize it for them and what's involved?
Yeah, well, we do a couple of things at the Talent Institute. We as I mentioned, we are reskilling university graduates, and what we do is we give them a 1-month training where we teach them lots and lots of different skills, and then they work with a client for 4 days a week, and 1 day a week they come back to our offices to get additional education. And usually they do 6-month stints at our clients' offices. So we teach our corporate clients to innovate, but if they don't have the right people, we can help them and provide them with people as well. And I feel really privileged that in the Netherlands we have helped to get 1,200 people employed again who were unemployed, bright, talented people. So we try to roll that out around the globe as well, and we've recently started about 6-8 months ago doing this in Melbourne as well. Yep. So it's really exciting to see that grow. Yeah.
Awesome, and we've definitely seen some really great people come through the Talent Institute.
Yeah. They're very bright people.
Kudos to SBC for starting that.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Really, really great. It's an honor to be able to do that. I'm serious to do that.
Absolutely. One last question before we wrap up. Looking throughout your entire career, where you started out from a family that hasn't done really well, to being a rebel and starting your own radio stations, to taking a company public through Endemol, to now starting Startupbootcamp, and your various arms of Startupbootcamp, even helping people upskill, whatnot. Simple question: how do you feel about all this when you take a step back and you reflect?
Well, most of my ambitions have been filled, and I just feel very, very privileged that I've been able to do what I did. I mean, I could lay on the beach of a very nice, sunny, tropical country for the rest of my life, but I'm here, and today I'm meeting you, so tonight when I call my wife on the phone, I say, hey, I met Jason, did a very nice talk with him, a podcast interview with him. If you work, if you create things, if you're able to, to help people create a better life, I mean, that's so fulfilling. I know a number of people who are very wealthy and who don't do anything anymore. And to be very honest, they're not the nicest people I know. You know, they start having white wine lunches, and they end the night with lots of wine, and the only thing they do is complain. But if you build a company, you automatically meet new people who inspire you, who give you new ideas, and you know you may go to the gym a few times a week to keep your body in shape. I am here, and because I do things like we're now doing in the podcast, I keep my mind sharp and focused, and it's just incredible. And I really love what I'm doing. I hope to do this for many years until, as I mentioned earlier in the program, people tell me, hey, it's time to move on. But you know, I got a couple of ideas. I mean, the state of tech you just mentioned, we could build a company out of that. You know, there's so much data that we have. So I would love to start a business intelligence division to start a bootcamp and to InnoLeaps. But if that's not possible, you know, I can do it outside. So to a certain extent, I would actually really enjoy someone saying, hey, Ruud, your time has come. It's time to move out, and I'll just move on to the next project. But at the same time, I really would like to build this company into an even more global operator. And Jason, the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself, and that's what I'm doing.
That's amazing. Thank you, Ruud, for being on the podcast. Can't wait to see what you get up to next, and it's been amazing chatting with you.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me.